Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Airlift Tanker Association's virtual seminar series, Round 2. Today we are joined by General Retired Duncan J. McNabb, Chairman of the Airlift Tanker Association, sharing his experiences, leadership advice, and the importance of ATA, and most importantly, taking your questions. The views expressed in this presentation are those of the speaker and do not reflect the official policy or position of the United States Air Force, the Department of Defense, or the United States government. Please take advantage of the question and answer feature in Teams to submit your questions anytime during the presentation. There is no need to wait until the end of the presentation portion to submit your questions. The earlier we get your question, the more likely we are to get to it in the time allotted. And without further ado, I would like to introduce the chairman of the Airlift Tanker Association, General Retired Duncan J.
Thank you, Popeye. Mobility teammates, welcome to round 2 of the Airlift Tanker Association's virtual seminar series. Again, for those of you who may not know me, I am General Retired Duncan McNabb, former commander of AMC and U.S. Transcom, and currently am proud to serve as the chairman of your Airlift Tanker Association. First, let me say we are in some unprecedented times, and we thank you for all that you are doing for our nation, day in and day out, which saves lives and gives everyone hope. Please also thank your loved ones, the stay-at-home patriots, for their support of you serving the way you do. We can never thank you or them enough. Your Airlift Tanker Association is continuing to do all we can to support our mobility airmen, preserve our mobility culture, and strengthen our bonds. The purpose of this new virtual seminar series is to provide all of you with unique opportunities to hear from and interact directly with mobility leaders, members of industry, community leaders, and other guests of interest on topics that are important to you. Future seminar series events are planned for roughly every couple of weeks, and we are targeting a total of 45 minutes, with the presenters spending the first 15 to 25 minutes discussing their topics, then interacting with attendees and answering their questions for the remainder of the session. So before I bring up my first slide, let me begin with my thoughts about the tragic death of George Floyd. Our chief, General Goldfein, Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Wright, and our soon-to-be next Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General C.Q. Brown's words say it far better than I, but given we are talking about leadership today, I think it is important to give you my thoughts. I, like I believe all Americans, were horrified by watching the murder of George Floyd. I couldn't believe it was happening in our country, with other policemen and citizens watching and not saving him. I joined the military and took an oath to help protect our citizens, and George Floyd was one of them. I wish I could have been there to stop what was happening, as I wish the people that were witnessing what was happening had saved his life. In the American Creed, the Airman's Creed, that all of us have sworn, it includes, I am an American Airman, guardian of freedom and justice, my nation's sword and shield, its sentry and avenger. I defend my country with my life. I am an American Airman, wingman, leader, warrior. I will never leave an airman behind. I will never falter, and I will not fail. I feel blessed that I joined the U.S. military, a very noble profession that protects our Americans' most precious and fundamental right, their freedom. It also allowed me the privilege of serving alongside some of the finest men and women in our country, Americans from all part of this great nation and all walks of life, and of different races, ethnicity, and gender, bonded by their common patriotism and their desire to serve a cause larger than themselves. I always told our commanders and senior enlisted leaders that everyone in their command or responsibility must know if they discriminate, assault, or harass any of our airmen, they are taking you and your senior enlisted leader on, not someone more vulnerable or of less power. In our creed, we swear we will never leave an airman behind, and that means we always protect each other, Today, the nation needs leaders and citizens who will not tolerate or allow prejudice or abuse in any form, who will stand together against it. It is indeed a critical part of being a member of our great military, and know how important your example will be to inspiring others to do the same. Like I said, just like I would do for a fellow airman, a wingman, I wish I could have been there to save George Floyd and others just like him. We must not allow this to happen on our watch. Popeye, first slide, please. So let me begin with talking about leadership. When I first started to put this together a couple of weeks ago, I thought about things that the things I would tell the other leadership, whether enlisted or officers, throughout my career. And over time, this included telling the new general officers, the capstone or the Air Force senior officer course. But it comes down to, and I'll kind of mention briefly a couple of stories on each one that kind of why it hits so far home with me. So it begins with you must be worthy. So as you take on the leadership positions, you must be absolutely worthy of these great airmen that you've been entrusted with. They are our greatest resource, and you need to take it very, very seriously at all levels, all the way on the officer corps, all the way on the enlisted corps, all the way down to Airman Leadership School. I still remember going, to visit the Airman Leadership School and watching, the 20 and 21-year-old airmen teaching the 18-year-old airmen and saying, if you want to be one of us, this is what this means. As you do this, it must be about the mission. It must be about them. It can never be about you. They will watch to see that, and you must take care of them. I remember I got to do a change of command when I was the vice chief of, and at that time, the acting chief of the Air Force, when we retired General Bill Looney from AETC. And he said very simply, as he retired, his last, he said, there's just three things that I prayed, I said thanks in my prayers each day. One that I was born an American. The chances that I would be born in this great country, this miracle that we have, was something that obviously I had nothing to do with it, but I was born here. He said, second, this was a choice, but it was almost by accident that I got to be in the military with these great men and women with a great culture where we all start the same from, again, all those walks of life that we come from, the diversity that's there. And the fact that we all start exactly even, and it's all based on your performance. And you just don't realize how important that is until you're around these great people and you realize how really, really lucky we are with all of the values that are taught to us. And then he said, third and last, I prayed every day that I would be worthy of these great airmen that I have been entrusted with. And I would tell you that all leadership at every level should feel that way. They should be humbled by it. They should understand that they've got to drive every day to be worthy of this great trust. Second big part is this is your time. This is your time. You have gotten here because you've worked so hard. Think of all the things that got you to where you are, whatever level you are, and you have worked hard to be here. And you will, as you are asked to take on the duties that you have been asked to do, trust your instincts. I would say you need to do it your way. Do it your way, and understand that you're going to bring everything about it, and you need to keep learning. And then the last thing on the leadership side, even again at every level, is you set the vision for what you're going to do. You set the priorities. It's really important. I remember, and this goes all the way through your career, no matter how senior you are. Many of you all know General Fogelman. Well, when I became the commander of the Air Mobility Command and brand new 4-star, I got a message that General Fogelman wanted to see me. And I just got to Scott Air Force Base, in fact, a house that he had actually been in when he was the commander of AMC and the commander of Transcom. And he built the bar and got this note and said, hey, he'd like to come in and see you. I'd only been in command about 2 weeks. And he said, and I said, hey, I'd love to have him for dinner. I'd love to, take him. And he goes, no, he just wants to have a drink with you. I go, well, no, we'll get a bunch of folks over. And he goes, no, he just wants to have a drink with you. And General Fogelman took the time, and sure enough, he came over, and I said, okay, drink it is, in a bar that he had actually built in the house. So we sat at that bar, and he said, I'm here to tell you this is your time. He said, you're going to have a lot of people tell you that you're brand new at this and you need to be careful, and there's things going on in Washington, there are politics, and that you ought to be careful. He said, and I'm telling you not to do that. He said, you are the champion for air mobility. And if you don't stand up, it is nobody else's place to do that. And you don't have time to wait. Trust yourself and go. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that. It's advice, great advice, and I've given it to every general officer since then to say, this is one, the fact that he took the time to come see me and tell me that. And I'll never forget that. Another one that was just like that was Bill Davidson, and he was the top civilian in the Department of the Air Force. That was not a political appointee. And I remember at this time I was a 3-star, and I was waiting to get on the calendar for the chief and secretary because I was about to brief all the 4-stars about our strategic plan. And every time I'd be on their calendars, I got pushed off. And I was telling Bill Davidson, here I'm about to brief him, and I haven't even really had a face-to-face with the chief and secretary who are going to be sitting there with all the 4-stars, and here I'm going to go through this. And he said, well, Duncan, I'll just tell you, it shows that they trust you. They've got a lot of things on their plate, and the fact that they didn't feel like they needed to have you go over this meant that they trust what you were doing, and you need to take it that way. I promise you that if you ever get going too fast and they want to pull you back, they will. But if they're not, you need to take it that way, and I'll never forget that. And again, I would tell you that's the same thing with you. I want folks to feel like they can go. The most frustrating thing is to realize that in many cases, you know exactly what needs to be done and you have to wait. So I wanted to make sure that I always built a culture that that was under my leadership, that they knew that. Third part is you're the keeper of the flame. You are the noble cause. Why is this? Why do we do this? Why is this worth it? It's the why. It's the legacy that we have. It is the founding fathers. It's our heritage. It's all of the things that go into this, and what makes us airmen, what makes us our military. When we take that oath of office, what does that mean? And young people need to hear that. They need to understand the why. And, I was thinking about during the things that we've been going through in the last 3 months, I've spent a lot of time going back to the founding fathers and thinking about why they put the things the way they did. There's the Federalist Papers that discuss in detail why the Constitution says what it says. What's the Bill of Rights? Why did they say it this way? And these are the times when you need to go back and look at that, because what they did was, in fact, a miracle. It was an experiment that they came together and they built this beautiful nation. Standard bearer. Always, always do what's right. That's that ethics part. That's the part that people will watch everything you do. And if you vary, they will lose faith in you. When I say standard bearer, when we talked at the very beginning about George Floyd, they will watch. Do you stand up? Do you walk the talk? Do you stand by on that stuff? You let that kind of thing happen. And when you don't, they won't. You must maintain the standards. When I say they will watch, you will watch. You will have to deal with some issues, and maybe some people that need some correction or are really truly bad actors. And everyone will watch if you will tolerate it or you will not tolerate it. And I would tell you that you need to make sure you maintain those standards. And then you watch good people stand up together and support you. And my last one is, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in the next slide, but one of the biggest things you need to do with these great people is thank them and unleash them. I used to say, when people would ask me about being commander of Air Mobility Command or or U.S. Transportation Command, I said, I really have the easiest job in the world. All I have to do is thank these great people and unleash them. And if you do that, then you can watch magic happen, because it's amazing what you all do when that happens. And I was never disappointed. One of the things that I used to make that point the most is that I got a call when I was commander of Transcom, and I happened to be in New York City and visiting the counterterrorism force, the terrorist task force in New York. And I got a call that said Secretary Gates wanted to talk to me. And that did not happen every day, where the Secretary of Defense wanted to talk to me. So, and he wanted, and I was supposed to call him. So I left the meeting and told them, hey, I can't believe this, but I just got, just got asked to talk to General or Secretary Gates. And I got there, and happened to be on April 1st. It really was 1 April. And as I walked out, I said, I bet he's just going to call and say what a great job we're doing. And everybody looked at me like, oh boy, I don't think that's what's going to happen. But I went in there and I called Secretary Gates, and he said, Duncan, I cannot believe what your mobility folks have done. He says, I can't believe how they are able to deliver all the things they do, and they do it quietly. And I just want to come thank them. And I'd like to come personally give your command and its components, and by extension, their components. So this is Transcom, but obviously AMC is the air component. I want to give them the Outstanding Unit Award, which isn't the first one we've got, but it is the first one we ever got personally from Secretary Gates. And he came out 2 weeks later, and he and General Petraeus came and presented that to us. And it was the only command that he did, at least at that time, but I'm pretty sure that stood, that he gave that Outstanding Unit Award personally to during his time as Secretary of Defense, with everything going on in Iraq and Afghanistan and across the globe. That's what you all earned. So when I say watch magic happen, that's what you earned. That's what you did. And he saw it. And he and General Petraeus wanted to make sure that they could come and tell you personally how much they appreciated it. So next slide. So this is one that I need to give you a little history, and we say unleash your airmen, and it's got McNabbisms. And what I found was that when I was Transcom and I would talk to our folks, and of course I don't get to talk to everybody personally very often, but I mentioned to them that this is what I want out of you. I want you to know that I trust you, and I want you to go. I trust you, go. And my vice, who was Admiral Harnachek, wrote these all down that I would say in the meetings, and he put it on a card and he gave it to everyone. And I didn't even know he did this. He didn't ask me, he just did it. And I guess he took me at my word. Yep, you said go, do it, I'm doing it. And so he sent out this card and he said, he really means this. And so the first time I saw him, it was on this card that I finally said, what are you guys talking about? And they said, oh, here it is. And I do realize that this is what I do say to people. So let me go through them and just talk relatively quickly on all of that, on what these meant to me. And this is your time. Again, I've mentioned that before, but do big things, make it better. Take this foundation that we have given you and make it better. And I would always tell them, if not you, who? If not now, when? You're the best in the world at this. So that's what this means. We are living historic times, doing things that have never done before. And you think about what we're doing with COVID-19 right now. You think about what we are asked to do on many occasions, and let's figure out how to get this done. For us, how do we make sure that you sit in Afghanistan and we're going to have to do that resupply, and no matter what happens, we got to make sure it gets through. And we start taking things through Central Asia, which we had never done before. So this is those times, and so make some history. Understand what a critical part you play in it. given all the things that are in Washington and all the things that go on, I always said, I need to tell you, no one is better at this than we are. And it really is, no one is better at this than you are. Act like it. Own it. I guarantee you know how to do this. Operationalize my intent. Get things done quickly. When we finally say this is where we want to go, do not hold back. Don't wait for the requirement. A lot of times our whole system waits for the requirement. You know what needs to be done. And I would tell our folks, if you need a requirement, I will give you one. I know, for instance, for the Haiti operation, when they had that earthquake and, they had no food, that both their port and their airfield were damaged. Their port was totally destroyed. And we had to look at how we were going to save 1 million people a day. But as we waited for somebody to give us a requirement, it was just a really hard thing to do because nobody knew how big or how extensive the problem was. Loss of life, what condition the roads were in. And so I told the folks, if I don't hear anything, I'll set the requirement tomorrow. And sure enough, we didn't hear anything. So I said, okay, 1 million, I want you to have food, water, shelter for 1 million people a day. So that got everything rolling. It allowed everybody to target something. And I said, what was nice about 1 million, if it needs to be 2 million, even I could do the math on that. You need, twice as much. So believe it or not, that requirement never changed. But what everybody needed was that in many cases, you can do that for your airmen. Press. And I said, just go for it. And I'll let you know if you're going too fast. That same thing Bill Davidson told me is, hey, do not wait for me. Do not wait for me. I trust you. Go. Get it done and make sure it gets done. Again, always do what's right, but I trust you to do it your way. If I need you to adjust, I'll let you know. And I will say, if you need something from me, you could always let me know. My job was to make sure I get everything out of your way. So one of the things I say, don't wait for me. If time is critical, make the decision and go. If you've been, everybody pretty much knows when you need to run it up the flagpole, but I understand sometimes that is not going to work, especially during wartime. And I want them to know that I will back you. Relationships are key, and you need to use them, and you need to honor them. Keep your promises, and in many cases, promises that you made at a lower level, you need to know that's important to me to make sure your promises come true because they're everything. This really gets me to the importance of ATA, the Airlift Tanker Association. Those relationships that you have with industry, one of the big things that ATA does, and it did for me when I was a young captain, the first times I went, is I got to know the people in industry and got to see what they were thinking, and I got to ask them, say, hey, here's what I'm thinking, here's my questions. And ATA brings that together, and every time you see sit on the floor with all of industry showing you what they're doing, they are looking for the feedback from you. They're looking to show you what they think. And that dialogue is critical. One of the things, again, as the commander of Transcom and the commander of AMC, the most important thing I did in the year was to speak to all of our great people and our industry and our civic leaders during ATA. It was my time to thank people. It was my time to give them a chance to talk to me on the side. It allowed me to talk to great young airmen and interact with them and watch them as we do the professional development that is so very, very important. As you try to get back to that slide before about know the why. Why is this important? What's going on here? And that's why you get to, when you go to the ATA convention, you get to normally hear from the chief or the vice chief of the Air Force and the secretary of the Air Force and the commander of Transcom, General Lyons, the commander of AMC. And I would just, as General Miller last year, as she goes through their things, it gives the time that we have to look you in the eye and tell you what you have done and put it in perspective. There was probably nothing that I had more fun. I enjoyed even this last couple of years as I went to the Heritage Room and watched wing commanders and young airmen interacting. and people coming up, and now they've listened to senior leadership. The Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force comes almost every year, and just think about how lucky that is. Shark Tank, and just things that allow your professional development, and then all of the seminars. So that interface with civic leaders, and of course they love coming to that too, but they also love that interaction. So what we want to do as well is do that with the chapters and make sure the chapters are that place where you have that same interaction at the different bases, and make it easy, just like this, to be able to do things and maybe go to a ball game together and do some other things that, again, help you with the professional development. So that's why I would just tell you, we want ATA to be of value to you, to be one of those networks that opens all of that up. So towards this, I'll go to my last slide, then we'll open this up for questions. Go ahead. And this is one of the things that I would tell you, this works for your life, or works for a unit that you lead, a group that you lead. And it has to do with energy, because your airmen are your greatest resource, and the thing that you control is their energy. What do they bring to the puzzle, or the problem area that you're going for? And I would say that in many cases you've seen people. I kind of look at this, and I'll talk about sustained excellence. But you know what happens if you run a marathon and that you really can't do anything for maybe 3-4 days, a week, 2 weeks. Since I've never run a marathon, I'll tell you I can't actually say it from first-hand knowledge. But you also know when you overwork yourself, it takes you a while to recover. But you can get to sustained excellence and just maintain that. And I would tell leaders, you do not make sure you take full care of, to make sure that you don't overdo what you're asking of your great airmen. So on the left this is an energy curve we use in flying, and it's usually a 3-dimensional chart, but it's just to make you feel. You can see the stall range. If you go too slow or you turn too hard, your airplane will fall, depending on what speed you're at. You can stall the airplane and fall out of the sky and potentially die. On the other side, this is your envelope. On the other side of the envelope is if you overspeed. Airplanes can only go so fast and are only designed to go so fast. If you go over that speed, your airplane can literally come apart. So everything in the gray area and that little green area is your envelope. This is the envelope in which you can fly in, and you're safe. But if you are against an adversary, the only place you can be is close to the edge of the envelope, which is where that comes from. And you need to operate as closely to that edge without going over as you can. And if you're closer to the edge of the envelope and somebody's inside that, you will beat them in combat. And I will say you will beat them in life. And I would just say, so what you're trying to do is make sure that you stayed at that edge of the envelope without going over. And again, sustained excellence is what that takes. That's the key. So as I look up on the right, how do you do that safely? How do you safely operate on the edge of the envelope? Well, first, it's total professionalism. You've got to have your stuff together, and that comes with superb training, absolute discipline, peak fitness, all the things that I think you all are so well aware of and why that's so important. The second part is teamwork. And finally, it's communication, making sure you have all those things. And then you can operate out there. If you don't have those, you've got to stay well inside that to make sure you don't overspeed. And then your next thing is, and this is what you need to be striving every day, is you need to expand that envelope. You need to move that line that says, to that overspeed. You need to move that, and you do that through transformation. And transformational effects come from a new way of doing things, a technology. It is new concept of operations, about how do you use that technology, and then organization, meaning institutionalize how you do this. My example of this was always our AirEvac system, and how we completely changed the AirEvac system. And we basically increased saving the people that got injured overseas, and a save rate that used to be in the low 70 to 75%, all the way through Desert Shield and Storm. and today it's 93 to 95% plus. And if you got to Bagram or Balad and you were alive, you had a 98 to 99% chance of survival. And think about what happened there and all the things that went on. But that's what we're looking for you to do in the mobility world. Figure out new ways. I think of C-17s, I think about K-loaders, I think about fast refueling to increase velocity. All of those things are things that you all are coming up with better ways, and that's what you're asked to do. And I think about it again, as I mentioned early on, I think about just how blessed I was to be part of a community that does this, that protects the Americans' most precious right, that I get to be with people like you. And you don't realize until you get a little older like me, just how lucky you are. And we need you to take it and make it better. When we think about what happened with George Floyd, we need you to help all of us figure out how to make this better. And the country will be looking at us, the highest rated profession. When you go to the American people, the highest, at least and everything that I have seen, has been the military by far. And it's because of what you do every day and those core values that you depict. And now people will be looking to you. How are we going to solve this? How do we make this better? And I know that we will, because I know how great you are. Again, easiest job I ever had. Unleash ya, thank you, and unleash ya. So with that, Popeye, I'm open for some questions.
All right, sir. Thank you so much for those words. The first question that we have for you is, tell us a story about an airman that had an impact on you.
Yeah, I have a number of airmen that had an impact on me, and I could name a number. But I'll give you an example of when I was the squadron commander of the 41st Squadron. I had a brand new second lieutenant that became my adjutant, and they had done away with kind of all of as a squadron commander, they'd done away with all of the additional staff and all those people, and so I have this second lieutenant, and I had known her. Her husband actually worked in the squadron, and she went to Florida, University of Florida, and she was an ROTC, and I'd met her at a squadron party, and I said, she was in ROTC, and I said, what do you want to do? And she says, I want to come to Charleston and work for you. And I said, well, I don't, if you're number one in your class, I'll be glad to help you with that. And I was brand new squadron commander, and I didn't have any idea whether I could make any of that happen. But sure enough, she called me up about 3 months later and said, okay, I'm number one in the class. Let's see what you can do, big boy. I still remember that. And so sure enough, by the time it all worked, she ended up getting to Charleston, and she wasn't going to be coming to my squadron, but somehow it all worked out, and she came and worked for me. And I remember her telling me we were getting ready for the Christmas party. And this is going to be my first Christmas party, for the squadron. And I remember, the MC duty was nobody wanted it, and you'd have to decide who would do it. So I said, okay, so you got the Christmas party rolling. And says, so have you decided who's going to be the MC? And this young second lieutenant looked at me and she said, well, sir, I'm going to be the MC. And I said, second lieutenant, 250 people in the squadron, and you're just going to do this. And she did it and wowed everybody. And I'll never forget that. So I would just say it just showed you she had courage, and she was ready to take it on, and she did a wonderful job. Some of you know her. Her name is Cheryl Ostroff. And I would say I'll never forget that. Now, just on a side, I also said that same thing later to another female who was trying to get into another part of, she wanted to get into Special Operations Forces. And I remember telling her that, if she graduated #1 in her class, give me a holler. She also called me and said, hey, I'm #1 in the class, so let's see what you can do. And I learned from that I've probably told that same thing to 100 guys, and not one has ever called me back. I've said it to 2 women, and they both called me back and said, yep, here I am. What can you do? So I learned a big lesson from that. So I'm very careful now because, some of the things that I promise, it's much tougher. So anyway, I've had a lot of other examples, and I would tell you another one is, in fact, Kim Huth, who ran my security, and she took me all over Central Asia, and nobody had ever done that kind of stuff before. And she did it. She was a master at it, and she was amazing in how she took care of all of that. So I had a number of people that surrounded me, and I've got a lot more stories than that. And but you all catch me at ATA, and I'll tell you some more.
All right, sir. So going based off of the likes on the questions and the question and answer, the next one I have for you is, what advice would you give to Caucasian leaders in this divisive racial climate?
Yeah, I think exactly what I mentioned before. I like I said, of all the things in the last 2 weeks that I've got to talk about this, is they've got to stand up and be counted. And they've got to take the time to really understand this and understand the kinds of things. I mean, I think if they haven't watched General Brown's or again, Chief Master Sergeant Wright or General Goldfein, and I found General Brown in particular saying, this is what I went through. This is what I think about. This is what happened to me. And you sit there and it's hard to understand because it's not something that many of us have seen. We don't know that happens all the time. I think it's just hard to believe that you watch 3 policemen watch another policeman slowly kill somebody. You just kind of look at it and you go, I just couldn't imagine that somebody didn't stop that. But I come from a culture where I've never seen something like that. But you're in many places. This is obviously not the only place, and you're hearing about that now. So we've got to listen better and figure that out and say, how do we make this better? And I'll tell you what, making sure that you will stand up, making sure. I mentioned that I would tell folks what I remember saying that to our commanders: if you allow harassment or discrimination or assault or anything in your watch, and this is to the commanders, I said, I will kill you. And then I would say, now the lawyers have said I can't say that. And I then say, nah, I just have to kill one. They have to know they're taking you on. So when I say that, they need to know that they are taking you on when that kind of behavior comes, because there's very few people that will prey on somebody that has the power to make that really hurt them. But they don't mind preying on young airmen and people that they think are vulnerable. So I would just say that's probably the biggest thing, is you need to listen. You need to understand that that's out there real. It still exists, and you need to stamp it out. And your example will make a big difference right away. But you need to listen, because in many cases you don't know the pain that has happened. And hearing that, I'll tell you, listen to General Brown. I mean, here he's going to be the chief, #1 person in the Air Force, Chief of Staff of the Air Force. I remember the one 4-star that I most admire was Colin Powell. And yet he had to go, when he would go through what he had to go through, and yet here he is just an outstanding leader. And you just kind of don't realize what he also had to go through, but he did. And he'll, in his book, you'll see some of that. And again, I think General Brown will be outstanding, and I think that's part of it. But Chief Master Sergeant Wright, God, I tell you what, that's a moving thing for anybody to listen to. So that's what I would tell any leaders right now. And your example will make a difference. And I think the American people are going to be looking for hey, how do we do this? And it's going to be leadership. It's going to be people that will stand up and not tolerate that.
All right, sir. We do have a bunch of ROTC cadets on today, so we got a couple of questions from them. The first one is, what one thing would you tell a new second lieutenant or civilian entering the workforce about how to be successful?
That one's, well, first, let me say hello to all the Arnold Air Society and Silver Wings folks. For you in the audience, before I became chairman of ATA, I was actually chairman of Arnold Air Society and Silver Wings, and it was I had more fun doing that. And as you all know, General Bundy was a great friend of mine, and I remember when he said, "Hey, I'd really like to have you come do that," and I had a great time. So I'll tell you what I tell folks is I tell them as a young lieutenant is you need to find really listen to your enlisted force and get to know them. And I said, and you need to realize that they're going to bring you, they have so much that they're going to bring you, and you need to understand that and get with that. But your profession, you're going to be amazed, and they will teach you, and you need to take the time. I remember I was a brand new second lieutenant flying 141s as a navigator, and the flight engineers and the loadmasters, I just, the professionalism that we got to see, and you got to see these folks, just how outstanding they are. I just remember if you went back and helped them, they would teach you and then help you in so many other ways. And I said, you're gonna watch this, and your chief is gonna perhaps come up to you and call you the lieutenant. And then one day you're gonna be standing there, and you're gonna be leading people, and you're entrusted with our greatest people, our airmen. And then one day that chief who you've respected and maybe feared a little bit, instead of calling you the lieutenant said, you're gonna hear him say, my lieutenant said. And you're going to have shivers go up the back of your spine, because you're going to go, something just happened, because you earned his respect, his or hers. And boy, once that happens, it's amazing. Again, that's what makes the magic happen.
All right, sir. We have another one from Emily Weir. She's the Arnold Air Society Silver Wings Public Relations Officer, and she wants to know, how do you believe civilian and military leadership would work best together?
Again, I would say, one of the things that the Silver Wing part brings is that belief in national security, and while you may not decide to wear the uniform, the fact that you care deeply about national security, the civilian control of the military is still one of those most profound, in our Constitution. It is one of the biggest parts of it. Freedom of the press is another one. And I would say that when you think about civilian control of the military, you want to make sure that you have people out there in civilian leadership roles that understand what's going on with us, because it's really important to have that, make sure that that trust is there. When you talk about the role that Silver Wingers have and what you're doing, you start down that path of getting to understand that later on may be that connecting dots that will allow you to help lead our military in the right way, and with an understanding of what you bring and then what they bring. I would say that it's probably same at every level. I would just say that at every level, being respectful of where everybody comes from and listening is just huge, and understand what different people's roles are in that, and also being empathetic with the fact that we have different roles and we're going to come from different places, but that diversity of views across the board in everything is huge. So that would be my advice.
All right, sir, going to circle back on some of the more touching issues for today. This one came in and said, sir, thank you for your insight today. Given the current climate in America and the change that is beginning to happen, is there something that you wish you could have done in your career that could have helped affect change sooner?
Yeah, I think probably having the discussion that we're having, where the chief and Chief Master Sergeant Wright, I think having that discussion to say, I need to learn more about this. And I wish I probably could have learned that earlier. I'll give an example of one that really had an impact on me. And I was at this time the vice chief. And I had a number of Black officers that came in and said, "Sir, we really like to talk to you about something." And not together. They came at different times, and they said, as you're competing for promotion, in this case, they're starting to talk about being a wing commander or being a general officer. And they said to me, "Sir, you need to know how often I'm told I'm just almost there, and I was second. I was the second pick, and I didn't quite make it through that last gamut." And he said, "You know, that's kind of a typical thing that comes up, is here we've gotten all the credentials, but we're almost there, but we're second." And shortly after that, Admiral Mullen, I got to go to Black Engineers of America. I got to go out and attend that, representing Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And I remember Admiral Mullen telling us that, you know, you need to understand that in many cases that they may not be in that same circle that you're used to being, and you may not know enough about them. And at the end of the day, you pick somebody you know. He said, so if it's close, you need to go with a diverse candidate. And I thought about that, and after that, I started telling folks that's pretty much how I think about that, because they in many cases don't have that same opportunity to build those relationships that maybe somebody else does. And so when I look at that, I always, because it was telling, you know, when I went back and looked at the stuff, and, you know, I looked at the PRFs and I went, and it wasn't really particularly having to do with, you know, the stuff that was directly under my control, but it did have to do with, you know, they said throughout my career, this has been kind of how it comes down. So those are things that I, you know, probably that I wish that I had thought through and knew when I was a major or a captain, when I could start doing that right away, because I did do that the rest of the time. But I really felt like, you know, it's that kind of thing, and you just don't realize it because I never realized it. So that's probably one that I think.
All right, sir, how would you address the decades-long issue of careerism in the Air Force ranks?
Well, I would hope when they talk about performance being the key, it really is, and I think you're seeing that with what the Air Force has tried to do, and the enlisted side as well, is that, you know, your promotions are based on performance, and the performance is not square filling, and so you end up. I think we've always tried to do more and more of that. There's a when I think about the people that are on the line doing the work, one thing I would tell you is getting your hands dirty and connecting dots and making the relationships with other people that do the same and other services, for instance. I still think about how outstanding it is to be out there flying airdrop and meeting all the folks from the 82nd Airborne and making a relationship with them when we're captains. And then later, those are the 3 stars and 4 stars that I'm working with. And I might have done a big exercise with one of them, but I spent a lot of time on the ramp. And when you look at one of the beauties of being in the military, it is doing the big things and learning from them. You know, whether that's the operation in Haiti or resupplying Central Asia, you know, for General Mattis and General Petraeus, being able to do that, that's where that comes from. And the careerism, you certainly need broadening, but I would say that, you know, if you're not the best at what you do, if you're not, you know, the person that goes to the top of whatever skill or whatever career you're in, then the rest of it shouldn't happen. In other words, that should be pivotal to it. And the people that do that, and the ones that want to broaden their perspective, they normally, and at least how I did it, I would look for the kinds of people that had that, because those are the ones that you can entrust with power and entrust with this duty to lead our greatest treasure, which is our airmen. So that's kind of how I looked at it. And because I certainly, if you haven't done that kind of stuff, it's not somebody I can trust with that. So that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Great, sir. One more question here for you along a similar topic. For a new leader, are there ways to control ego for best results?
Okay, do you think that means the leader's ego or your own?
I think they're meeting for a new leader, so I think they're talking about their own, but feel free to take any liberty you want with that.
Okay, well, I'll assume that's what it is. So understand, this can never be about you. Never. You have people that they did not sign up to serve you. They raised their hand for freedom and to serve this country. And their obligation is the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. There's nothing about you in there. And so they don't mind, you're going to have your own techniques of leadership. But I would say if in fact you think that your ego or they should listen to you because you're the smartest or whatever that is, I would tell you that will not work. They are the best in the world. I'll take just a second to say I got to go to this. It was a course after the wall came down, after the Cold War was over, and this is about 97, 98 time frame, and they had Russian generals and U.S. generals, and they came together, and it ended up that what happened during that time is you started off. These are people that had been your adversary all this time, and now you're here at Harvard together, and they're teaching you to basically get to know each other. And after we got to know each other, it came up with how good you've now been to the United States. What do you think? What do you think of our military? And they've now toured and seen, and they go, you have good tanks. We have good tanks. You have good airplanes. We have good airplanes. You have good ships. We have good ships too. Rockets. Our rockets are bigger than yours. Our rockets. So we win on the rockets. Then we got into the officer corps. You have a good officer corps. We have a good officer corps. Then the flag officers, the general officers, so your general officers. Now they had a few drinks with us now, so they knew what we were worth, and they said your general officers cannot drink vodka, so we win on these. And then we said enlisted, and they said we have nothing like your enlisted corps, nothing. The professionalism of your enlisted corps would have been the difference maker in our battle. And that's what I mean when that ego. You need to arrest your ego, because you are serving some superstars, and you need to feel like that. You need to feel worthy of that. And so that would be my advice.
All right, sir, we've got about 7 minutes left, so we're going to get two last questions in. The first one is, one of General A.J. Stewart's key points was that what sets the U.S. apart from all nations is our ability to project power globally, and that AMC was the key enabler of that. Now, however, even small nations can project power globally in cyberspace and directly threaten AMC's entire mission space. How can we best position ourselves to meet this threat?
Yeah, and I would. No, that's a great question, and I think that's when you look at the new National Defense Strategy and what it is asking, everybody to take a look at is how can you do this given the threats that we face today, and I would say, one, being aware of that, and I actually got to co-chair a study on survivable logistics against strategic competitors. And I would say that we spend a lot of time thinking about now what can they do, and then how do we go around that, and how do we make sure that we're set to go, and we can defeat that threat. Now, a lot of that was classified, so I can't really tell you a bunch about that. But I will just say that understanding that our adversaries understand one of our asymmetric advantages is our strategic ability to move. And they know that if they can slow that down or stop it or confuse it, it will be to their advantage. And they have figured out that they should target that. And so we've got to understand that and say we've been, you know, sitting pretty well in all of this. And so now we've got to understand that they're specifically looking at and see how they could slow us down. So I will say that we will probably have to do more dispersed operations in theater, more theater kinds of things, and it could be much more than air. It's going to be other theater assets. And I would say at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we have options, multiple options that allow us to make sure it gets through. I used to tell, both General Mattis and General Petraeus is my job as both of those, AMC commander and Transcom commander, was to make sure that we worried about this and took care of it so they never had to worry about that. So they never had to worry, and we did that by providing lots of options. So opening up as we went, we originally going into Afghanistan, we had one way, we had Karachi, port of Karachi in Pakistan, and then we had two routes coming out of there that resupplied Afghanistan. Everything else we did by air. And everything that was critical went by air, but you knew that if, you know, things got dicey, that might not suffice. So we decided, I should tell you this because it's always a good story, but when Secretary Gates, that same Secretary Gates that I mentioned before, when he gave me the flag for Transcom, he mentioned, you know, at the end of his remarks, you know, and he said, well, Duncan, I want to quote from somebody that is well aware of the problems in Afghanistan. And it is in fact that my logisticians are a humorless lot, for they know that if my campaign fails, they will be the first ones I will slay. And then he said, good luck, Duncan. And he brought me the flag. And of course I went, slay? You know, there's a Slade clause. And so I said, I probably have to talk to my wife about that. But anyway, I was just, it made it all make sense. And of course, him coming then later on and handing us that unit award, outstanding unit award, personally was huge, because I think that's what we have to do. We have got to continue to look for ways to make sure we keep this asymmetric advantage, because it keeps them at bay and they know that we will come. And if we decide we will come, we will destroy and change their world. And we got to make sure that we do that, and we can be able to move our military forces to do that.
All right, sir. Last question is, what does the future of the ATA convention look like for this year?
Yeah, great question. And we're obviously, we would like to have it live, and we're still hoping that we will be able to have it live. We have a ATA board meeting early August, right now scheduled, going to be in Pittsburgh with the reserve unit there. But whether we will do it virtually, that's obviously an option. And you can see this actually helps us begin to figure out ways we might be able to do that. We are following as well AFA, because they've got to think about their convention in September, and also NDIA. So as we talk to the different leaders, and this, and General Hawk Carlisle with NDIA, and General Orville Wright with AFA. But as we compare notes, we all realize that it really is important, if possible, for us to get everybody together, because I think everybody needs to be. Now, whether the environment will allow that, that's a different story. And so we know that we are looking at that and trying to figure out options, but we're still hopeful that we can do that. So that's the plan right now. And hopefully we can make it happen, and it might be a hybrid, so we might be able to figure out a way to do that as well. So with that, you all, I just thank you for putting up with us for a whole hour and listening in. I really do appreciate what you do every day, and I can't thank you enough. Additionally, please thank your loved ones, because they really do allow you to serve at great sacrifice to themselves and great worry. And I know when I retired, I never knew my wife worried about. Every time I went overseas, she worried. And I went, I can't imagine, be worrying about that, because I was really safe. But she never believed it. She just thought, from the time I was flying, the line 141s and C-17s, and just going, hey, they don't know what you're doing, because you can't really tell them, and they're never sure, and they know you'll downplay it anyway. So please give your loved ones a big hug and tell them thanks. So back to you, Popeye.
All right, sir. Thanks so much. Would you like to introduce the next round?
Yes. So we have an outstanding person coming in 2 weeks. And I would just say that round 3 of the seminar series is scheduled for June 26th at, again, same time, 1300 Eastern, and Lieutenant General retired Sam Cox, new Vice President of Boeing of Mobility Programs. I've known Sam a long time, and when I commanded the 41st Squadron at Charleston, C-141 Squadron, Sam was my #1 captain, and you really could build a whole squadron around him. And he had a brilliant Air Force career and actually finished up as the 18th Air Force Commander. He's one of the most outstanding mobility leaders we have, and someone I thoroughly admire. His perspectives are will be well worth listening to, so tune in. And I'd like to please thank friends and coworkers about this series. A lot of folks went in to make this happen. Popeye, you and the ATA and AMC team, we really appreciate you putting it all together. And so do all. All the best, and stay safe and healthy. We need you. We need you.
All right, those of you, there was one question that didn't get answered, but we will get you an answer after the event. So you'll see an email pop up there at the bottom, the admin@airlifttanker.onmicrosoft.com. So if you would like us to get you that answer, just email me there, and I'll get General McNabb to provide that in writing and get it out to all of your folks. Thank you so much. The views expressed in this presentation are those of the speaker and do not reflect the official policy or position of the United States Air Force, the Department of Defense, or the United States government. Please send comments and suggestions for future topics and guests to us at admin@airlifttanker.onmicrosoft.com. Thanks for joining us, and have a great day.